Hi all, welcome back. So today the talk is going to be on gambling, sports betting since the earliest days in Canada right up until recent times. And as you're probably aware, there's been a massive shift and a massive growth in gambling on sports in North America in recent times. Okay, so this is where we're going, everything up here. And it's a lot of what we're talking about, some of what we're talking about, you'll get further context on later on in the course with other lectures on those topics where we drill down a bit more into them. The amateur ethic, muscular Christianity, these type of things. So don't get too exercised, but I don't give enough context here. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm betting you're going to enjoy it. Now, first recall that gambling on individual sports was very common in Canada, and even pre-contact, Indigenous people were heavy gamblers. They betted very heavily on their races and on their lacrosse games. We know that, and we know that in New France, it's very common as well, and there's especially on horse races. One of the big things they're doing that we in as we get into the Canadian period after 1867, we know that it's rampant in all these new sports that are being developed in Montreal, being codified, and particularly in lacrosse, which quickly becomes the biggest game. And we know that because in the 1870s, the National Lacrosse Association is trying very hard to stamp it out. So we have records of that. At the same time, we know that the country's biggest newspapers, which are the Toronto Globe and the Montreal Gazette, are printing the betting odds out. We right there on their multiple pages on the daily newspaper. We also know that the Montreal Shamrocks, who are always the bad boys of lacrosse, were promoting betting openly, and that the club officers are also selling betting pools. In BC, it's the same story, and gambling is a real fixture in the BC lacrosse leagues in the 1910s and 1920s, the Con Jones years. And in fact, and I hadn't mentioned this when talking about Con Jones, is he comes to BC from Australia because he's running away from a betting scandal. In point of fact, he'd even changed his name to get away from what he'd done there. Now, short story, his name had been Thomas Shortell, and Thomas Shortell, the Con Jones, the real Con Jones, he ran a betting shop in Melbourne. And at one point, he bet really big on a horse race, the biggest one in the country, the Melbourne Cup. And he specifically bet that the two favorites would lose. Now, if he'd been right, he'd have been set for life. He would have cleaned up. But he also knew that if he lost, he wouldn't be able to pay out. So, which of course, inevitably, the two favorites came in first and second. And so, just as he had planned, he took the money and he skipped town, sailed to Vancouver, changed his name. And yes, he doesn't move away from these practices. With his pool halls and his sports promotion, his main income is on the betting side. Gambling is also endemic in boxing in early Canada. Now, boxing itself is illegal in most provinces in the 19th century, and partly because it's bare knuckle boxing. That is the main thing till about the year 1900 when glove boxing becomes dominant. But in the bare knuckle boxing days, it's not unusual for fights to go to about 40 rounds. Very popular, and it's really all about betting, gambling, and mainly it is ignored. In fact, the police interfered in boxing only when the bouts are not really going the way the promoters had intended. And in fact, a Canadian George Dixon becomes the world bantamweight title holder in 1890 and becomes a national sensation, famous enough that he puts on a vaudeville show that tours Canada and makes a good profit out of that. So you get this weird cultural tension where something illegal is also enormously popular. Lots of betting in early Canadian baseball as well, even in snowshoeing competitions that we've talked about. And it's also a massive feature in this really robust tavern culture of the time, at a time when people drank a lot more than they do today. And there's a class element here, working class element. We used to have so many taverns in Canadian cities, and particularly in our biggest cities. Montreal being Canada's main city for a very long time. Taverns numbered thousands in Montreal alone. And on race days at the Blue Bonnet Horse Racetrack, there were 30 separate taverns where you could take bets on horse races right at the racetrack. Okay? That was built in 1872, later used for foot and bike racing. But yeah, that's just a small part of it. Drinking holes go in tandem with gambling, with bookies, and they're both of those things are big in every town and every half-sized city in every province throughout the Victorian era. Lots of historians have done work on this. Judith Fingard is one, Judith Fingard, and she has a great article on the dark side of life in Victorian Halifax. And she talks about things like betting on cockfighting and boxing matches. And always by what the middle class called the dangerous classes, right? They look down on this, and there's reformers trying to stamp it out. If you want some idea of the amazingly rich tavern culture of the time, you definitely have to read Peter de Lottenville's article about Joe Beef's Tavern in Montreal. It's probably the funnest history article you ever read. We don't often associate history articles with fun, but it's hilarious. Joe Beef is the custodian, the owner. His actual name is Charles McKiernan, and he's this Irish-Canadian innkeeper on the waterfront. Super colorful guy. Offers cheap food, drinking games, lots of gambling. He's even got a beer-guzzling bear in here. So lots of fun times in this robust tavern culture where gambling is absolutely part of it. Now, the popularity of betting, in fact, rose significantly in the third quarter of the 19th century, and that happens with the proliferation then of leagues and the organization of sport, more competitions, and the increase of sports coverage in the media, in the press of the day, right? Ned Hanlan is the best example of this, of an athlete who is heavily betted on and who heavily bets on himself. And yeah, fortunes are wagered on his races then, which are actually the most widely followed sporting events in Canada, in North America, and in fact in world history. The Ned Hanlan versus Charles Courtney rivalry, Charles Courtney being his American nemesis rival at the time, was literally the most followed sporting event in world history to this point. Rowing being the biggest sport of the era, so that makes sense. In fact, you see that in the fact that over 500,000 people, some historians say up to 1 million, came out to watch the Harvard-Oxford race on the Thames in 1869. So Ned Hanlan being a world champion, it makes sense. His fame is unmatched, which is why historians say he's the most closely followed athlete in world history to that point. And of course, a good rivalry also always helps, and it's pretty intense with Courtney because of the delays involved as well. When they meet for the first time, it's not long after this match where Courtney's iced tea had been drugged and he had to forfeit, and that's the kind of classic thing that you'll see all the time when betting is massive in the 19th century. These kind of shenanigans. In any case, Hanlan is loved by Canucks. He's hated by Americans because of his showboating. He's a massively egotistical individual, and he will tease his opponents. He'll do things like he'll ease off at the end to narrow his lead, make it more exciting. He even was known to turn around just shy of the finish line, go back to his competitor and beat them in the second time, turn around again and beat them in. He has a repertoire of fake problems. He'll pretend to have steering issues. He zigzags, he drops his oars, he'll stop and he'll blow kisses to the crowd even. And he kind of has to do this because, and this gets pointed out in this great article that I recommend you read. It's called The Scandalous Scholar by David Givens, and you can find it online. But Givens points out that if you crush everyone all the time, the bookies are going to stop giving good odds. So how's he going to make a living betting on himself if he always wins? Right? So he has to make it more exciting. It also explains why he goes international to fleece more willing victims. But of course he would anyway, as he gets better in challenges for world title. In any case, when he finally does meet up with Coughlin, the purse is $8,000. So that would be the winnings they take in addition to whatever they're betting on themselves. So, and that's over $250,000 today. Hanlan won that race by a boat length only, but there were rumors that they fixed it to make it more exciting, and that Coughlin gave up the race and decided, in fact, that they would share the purse. Right. So So the rumor was that Courtney took 4,000 from Hanlan to throw the race, which it certainly looked like he did because he slacked off at the last minute. Now, of course, add to that, as I said, they both would have made a lot more in betting for or against themselves. Now, what's interesting, this has applicability to today, is that these rumors amazingly only stoke more interest. So yeah, there's a lot of betting going on for their second meetup where Courtney has to forfeit because his boat was cut in half the night before. Again, the kind of thing that happens when betting gets out of control, out of hand, and Hanlan wins that one by default. Yeah, someone's getting rich here. Again, more strange antics. Now, for their third meetup, that's on the Hudson River, New York. You have 100,000 people come out, and it's such a big event that Congress shuts down, and the President Rutherford Hayes at the time, he's in the crowd. So massive, and wage pools would, in any race at that time with Hanlan, would be over $10,000. So that's a baseline for what would have happened here, and 10,000 is 30 million today, so it would be in the tens of millions. Hanlan won that one easily because Courtney doesn't even seem to be trying, and then Hanlan goes off to England to challenge for the world title from the 6'4" Aussie Ed Tocchet. Beats him handily and becomes the world professional singles champion, and that's the year 1880. Nobody could beat Hanlan. In fact, he made a fool of Tocchet, teasing him in those with that turnaround trick I told you about, beating him to the finish. And some accounts say it's because he's so effective because he uses a sliding seat. Okay, that's this new invention in rowing. Okay, but that's kind of ridiculous because he's not the first, and he's definitely not the only one to use a sliding seat. But he is the first to perfect this technique with that seat, this coordination, the full body extension. So yeah, no doubt, without a doubt, he's a very, very good rower and completely out of everyone's league. And yeah, undefeated until finally he is by this Aussie in 1884 named Bill Beach. Bill Beach is a bit of a monster. He's massive, and in spite of Hanlan cheating, he rode into Beach's lane. He fouled him, but Beach recovered from that and took him. Hanlan is so upset by this, so unused to it, that he demands a rematch while Beach is showering post-race. So Beach gets out of the shower and says, certainly I'll oblige you, and then he thrashes him again, which is kind of satisfying. Any case, still Hanlan has made his fortune, and it's intimately tied to the one consistent revenue source that he can always tap into, which is betting on himself. And in fact, everything he does as an athlete is based on that calculus. Incidentally, he remains the most famous rower in the world till he dies prematurely at the age of 52. Unfortunately, at that point, being the national icon that he is, he's got this mile-long funeral procession. His body actually lays in state in St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Toronto, where thousands come out, do a walk past, pay their respects, which, yeah, that doesn't happen to everyone, and very seldom has happened in Canadian history. A statue was put up to Hanlan, a 30-foot high statue on Centre Island in Toronto, where he had grown up. That's in 1926, and that is now then called Hanlan's Point on Centre Island. Hanlan's Point being right next to, at that time, J.W. Gorman's famous diving horses, which was right beside the new, now long gone, Hanlan's Point Stadium, where in 1914, a 19-year-old George Herman Ruth, playing for the Providence Grays, hit his first and only home run in the minor leagues. And his first home run as a professional, better known as Babe Ruth. You might recognize the name. So that ball is still in the lake, allegedly, and the team he's here beating 9-0 is the Toronto Maple Leafs minor league baseball team, which predated the Toronto St. Patrick's, which become the St. Pat's, which become the NHL team we know, predated them by about 20 years. Now, to finish this random rant, which everything coming together here at Hanlan's Point, that team, the Maple Leafs, that baseball team, lasts until it folds in 1967, which you could say the same of their more famous hockey counterparts. Any case, today Hanlan's Point is a clothing optional beach. You wanted to know that. But to return to our point, Hanlan's story really showcases Victorians that they would bet on anything, which is just like the proposition bets of today, prop bets of today. And for an athlete with some ego and showmanship, they were willing to be milked, right? Even with the illegal game fixing, like say cutting your opponent's boat in half, that only makes for more drama, only makes for bigger crowds. Now, even as gambling is growing at the time, there's this effort to deal with it and with drinking, which is all part of the war on vice that's happening in the British Empire, and really all part of Canadian state formation. And that's the central point of a book by Marcel Martel, which is called Canada the Good, A Short History of Vice Since 1500. He does a deep dive into that, how this is a function of state formation at the time, and how these moral reformers what motivates them, what drives them, and the class element here. Now, moral reformers hate gaming as much as they hate the alcohol that is sold at pretty much any event that's being wagered on. And yeah, they eventually win out. And that happens when single sport gambling becomes illegal as per our very first ever unified criminal code, that is 1892. So our first criminal code, 1892, has a sanction against sport gambling, makes it illegal. And that is for completely across the board until about 10 years later, 15 years later, there's a carve out made for pari-mutuel betting. That gets legalized actually in 1910. Pari-mutuel betting being mostly on horse racing, and this is where all the bets are pooled and the winnings are evenly distributed proportional to the number of people in the pool and how much was bet. So this means this removes what pari-mutuel betting does. Why it's acceptable is it removes the incentive for the operator, for the house, to cheat. Also can be taxed by the state, so that's an incentive to make that legal. It was seen as acceptable because it's not conducive to fraud. Otherwise, there's a ban on gambling, and the thing is that this new criminal code and the ban on gambling actually helps sports enormously because now they're seen as more legitimate. So this is central to the wider story of the growth of modern sports, legitimation of them, and it's part of a change that's happening in tandem with the ethic and the growth of the ethic of muscular Christianity, with that taking hold. And we'll talk about that later in a lecture on amateurism and the rise of pay for play and how that takes over from the amateur game. So you'll have a better idea then what that's all about. But for now, know that, ironically, as the zeitgeist swings in favor of unpaid sports, it made the temptation for athletes to gamble that much higher because they're unpaid. And crime syndicates then will bribe athletes to throw games. And that's one way to get paid, right? And as you will find out, a famous example of that is, and we'll talk about that later as well, is the world famous Canadian native runner, Tom Longboat. He was rumored to have been drugged by his own coach in his very famous 1908 marathon, Olympic marathon. And that's because his coach had made bets and on him losing. Even if that didn't happen, and it seems it did, betting at that time is common enough that this is the assumed explanation for what happened. So yes, we do see gambling continuing and growing under what happens next by the 1920s, which is prohibition. Prohibition arrives in the 20s and lasts into the 30s. Inadvertently, this contributed to illegal gambling activities in cities like Montreal, just as it inadvertently contributed to the growth of alcohol production in cities like Montreal. And so, yeah, we do see it continuing in the 30s and into the 40s. And hockey is not immune from this. And in fact, in the mid-1940s, the NHL, under President Clarence Campbell, he cracks down on players betting on games, allegedly to protect the integrity of the sport. Babe Pratt, 1946, is the first. He's the first major case. He's a Maple Leafs defenseman who bet on his own team in other NHL games. So he gets suspended, but he gets reinstated after 9 games when he confessed, and that kind of set a precedent. 1948, we have Billy Taylor and Don Gallagher, Boston Bruins teammates, and so yeah, they're implicated for betting on their own team to lose, and they're given lifetime bans for associating with gamblers. Now, the outcome of that is Taylor and Gallagher's bans, they last 22 years. That effectively ends their NHL careers despite appeals. Pratt, meanwhile, was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1966, so it kind of highlights the different outcomes that could have happened. Another important context in this era, 1940s and 50s, is salaries are very low. And recall that finally in 1957, the NHL brings in a $7,500 a year minimum salary. Okay? It's doing that to prevent the formation of a players' union, but still at this late point, that is only 1.5 times the average Canadian annual wage. Okay? But yeah, these are kind of one-offs, and there's really no major high-profile illegal player gambling scandals after these three. Which is not to say that it wasn't happening. Of course, Clarence Campbell would want to make it look like hockey is clean by taking out a few obvious bad apples, right? Anyway, fast forward to 2006. Things get exciting again. New Jersey State Police uncover a illegal betting ring in New Jersey with possible ties to organized crime, and the NHL. Now, this started with one bad cop, James Harney. There's his picture. He looks it, and he admitted that he was running this ring along with Phoenix Coyotes coach of the time, Rick Tocchet. Assistant coach, to Wayne Gretzky, who was the head coach then in what turned out to be exposing his limitations in the coaching world, as you may know. But in any case, our state trooper Harney, he pled guilty to conspiracy, but not before this month-long police investigation that was called Operation Slapshot, and which really shook the NHL at the time. And among the names that surfaced in this was Jeremy Roenick, who was then playing for the LA Kings. He was never charged, but reports indicated he had participated and allegedly spent more than $100,000 on betting tips from a Florida firm. There's enough on him that he's forced to provide legal testimony, which really badly damaged his reputation, but no consequences beyond that. Same thing for Travis Green, who was then a Maple Leaf, later on becomes coach of the Canucks and the Devils, and as of 2025, the Senators. But is he widely known that he was in on this? Not really. You really have to dig to find it. It isn't on his Wikipedia page in any case. More interesting maybe is how close this comes, this Operation Slapshot thing, to Wayne Gretzky. Janet Jones Gretzky had placed large bets, nearly 500,000 apparently, through the same gambling ring. And rumors then were out there that Gretzky might have had knowledge of the betting. And in fact, wiretaps show that he, in spite of his denials, he had known about it. He denied any involvement, as in making his own bets, and there's no evidence he ever made his own bets, but he definitely knew that his wife was making bets, illegal bets. Now, Rick Tocchet, meantime, denied up and down that he's the 50-50 partner on this gambling ring operation. He denies, even files a defamation suit or threatens to with Janet Gretzky against the police, and then he quietly drops that kind of bravado talk, and the suit doesn't go anywhere because more and more evidence comes out that he absolutely was in on this and absolutely was running this. So eventually he pled guilty to conspiracy and promoting gambling. He's placed on probation for 2 years but avoided jail time. Key point though, all this, lots of betting. Over 1,000 bets were made. Janet Gretzky bet 100,000 on football just in the time frame of that 40-day investigation when she was under the spotlight of the police without knowing it. Police said many more players and coaches were in on this. On the other hand, the bets were apparently mainly on NFL games. So these bettors are smart enough not to be betting on their own teams, not to risk their own careers that way. That would have been far more damaging to the league as well. So yes, gambling's always been an issue in the NHL, but a real dark number there. We don't know how much was happening overall over the decades. Not, it's episodic when the heat is on full blown and it's erupts above the surface, right? Especially in pro hockey. Now that's till after 2021. And other sports leagues, kind of the same story. It's in recent years that we're getting a big uptick. Worse probably was 2025 with the NBA scandals, where Coach Chauncey Billups, 34 others are arrested for betting on their own games, right? And this uptick happens in tandem with the legalization of sports betting and online gambling. Now that starts in the U.S. in 2018, and then in Canada in 2021. And in the states, it happened following this Supreme Court ruling in what was called Murphy versus the NCAA. Okay, United States Supreme Court ruling Murphy versus NCAA. Now, this was a states' rights case where federal legislation over betting in New Jersey was found to be unconstitutional. Okay? The NCAA and all the big pro sports leagues, including the NHL, were in on this suit, and they challenged the congressional law on sports betting as overstepping states' rights, which are protected by the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Now, Canada followed suit shortly after August 2021 in Bill C-218, which legalized single-game sports betting. And what it did is it allowed each province to regulate it as they saw fit. So it's almost a mirror of the American one, where they're giving that authority to the provinces and abrogating it from themselves, from the federal level. And why did the Canadians do it? Where it's because of the money. They want to get. It's exactly that, to get in on the money that's being lost to the newly legalized American online betting. Of course, it's wrapped up in the language of redirecting those billions in annual wages that are flowing out of the country into something that's safe and regulated here in Canada. But really, it's because the Americans have done it, and we're losing billions in Canadians betting through online through the states. Now, two stories I want to give you since then that kind of are suggestive of the impact and give us some idea of what this has meant. Okay, one of them is Shane Pinto, 2024. So he's playing as a free agent with the Ottawa Senators. He's not on contract, and he gets a 41-game suspension, a really heavy suspension for gambling. He's the first NHLer to get a suspension for sports gambling since the 1940s. The difference being, of course, that sports betting was illegal then. Today, it's not. But players are strictly prohibited, as you probably know, from betting on any NHL game or event. That's in the collective bargaining agreement. It's Rule 14.1, I believe, and that's all that it says. That is all that it says, right? But that they cannot bet on their own league. Okay? And as with all sport leagues, it just makes sense, right? You shouldn't be betting on your own league, right? And but Pinto was not betting on hockey games. Okay, what he was doing was proxy betting, which means he got friends in the U.S. to place bets on his behalf while he was in Canada. So proxy betting, getting someone else to bet for you, which the NHL doesn't like because it smells bad, right? Third-party betting is not specifically banned, but it's also not really allowed because, yeah, it doesn't look good. It's a risk. It's a way to hide and get around specific state or provincial rules. Why are you betting through a proxy is the question it raises, right? And even though he's not betting on hockey games, the NHL wanted to make an example of him. But really, what this case highlighted is this tightrope that leagues have to walk now, and what makes for an infraction, right? And he could have easily bet on these games himself without a proxy. Okay, but in any case, Pinto lands on his feet, and that scandal is behind him, and he signed after that a 4-year, $30 million contract with the Senators. So clearly didn't hurt his hockey career. Now, second story, player Evander Kane. Okay. Evander Kane, he grew up in East Vancouver, has been in the NHL since 2009. His reputation, how do I put this politely? His reputation is that he's really an asshole, but whatever else he is or is not, he's definitely not the brightest brick in the stack. He has a real talent for collecting enemies. He has abuse allegations against women that are trailing him. During COVID, he bought fake vaccination card. He's a coach's nightmare. He's chippy with refs. His teammates tend not to like him. Real colorful career. In short, he's really Reddit bait. He's up there with another widely hated Canadian, Corey Perry, who at least could blame his alcoholism for his issues. But in any case, 2019, he makes the news again because he's being sued by a Las Vegas casino for walking out on a $500,000 gambling debt. So what happened is he was playing for the San Jose Sharks at the time, and he'd been in Vegas to play the Knights, and he racked up this massive debt. He then files for bankruptcy, Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and at which point he's got 27 million in debt. Okay? So the casino thing is just a small part of that. Really bad time for him because his wife now puts out an Instagram post saying that he's been throwing games and betting on his own team. He completely denies this, but in an interview with ESPN, he admitted he had a gambling addiction. And in fact, this went back years. Okay? So the thing about Kane is after filing bankruptcy, he gets signed by Edmonton with a $22 million contract, which really enough to pay back most of his creditors. But of course, he doesn't have to because he's gotten away from that debt with his bankruptcy. That's what it does. So yes, he definitely has enemies in his past, and again, connected completely with gambling. So here we have two stories in a league where we didn't hear this kind of thing for about 20 years. Since Operation Slapshot, or really at this level since the 1940s. And again, it seems to be the result of that simple fact, that the legalization of sports betting throughout Canada and the United States. And since then, leagues have been trying very hard to make it appear that they take these things seriously. But, and a really key point here, this hasn't stopped them from diving headfirst into this new world of sports betting. Okay, it hasn't stopped the leagues from doing that. And why is that? Well, to ask the question is almost insulting. It's the same reason that Canada followed the Americans in their decision on gaming industries, or the legal decision to open it up. It's because it's so lucrative. Okay? And that's the simple answer. Now, you may know that the NHL is unique in that its revenue is largely gate-driven. 44% is ticket sales. Okay, that's unique. That's more than twice most pro sports leagues. It's 17% in the NBA or thereabouts. But then with the NHL, there's also local merchandise, there's local media rights, and together that by far is most of the 6 to 7 billion that it earns every year. Okay, which again makes the NHL unique, but they're not unique in wanting more money. And online gambling is a whole new revenue stream. And it has huge potential, and it has potential. It has a knock-on effect in those other streams. Okay, and that's why it's so powerful. Okay, that's why it's so popular with pro sports leagues. And yeah. For example, the direct benefit, the NHL has signed partnerships with these major betting companies like BetMGM, FanDuel, DraftKings, and these companies are now then official sports betting partners of the league. So that is direct money, which in 2025 was 150 million. And maybe you have these betting apps, right? That's your door into the three most popular NHL betting games, one being Puckline, which is hockey's version of the point spread that's used in other sports. Moneyline is another, under-over. Any case, if the payouts on those aren't enticing enough, you can do prop bets, proposition betting. And that's a wager within a game that doesn't relate to the overall outcome of that game. And that can be anything. It can be the time of the first goal, the number of points a given player will get in a game or a season. Prop bets are bigger in football. They've been around longer, and you can bet on anything in football. Maybe you know this. You can bet on the color of the Gatorade. You can bet on the length of the national anthem. The point is, if you get into any of this, the NHL loves you. And that's because this betting is exposure. It gets a lot more eyes on the game than before, and very attentive eyes. You're keenly watching everything when you bet on it. Now, this means, of course, that the league can generate significantly more advertising revenue as well as sponsorship deals. Okay, and it also changes how we view the game. It fundamentally alters it. That's another important point. Networks like ESPN and TSN, they now routinely incorporate these betting odds, and they will have these dedicated wagering segments to make their broadcasts more engaging for the betting audience. And in tandem, then, also more attractive to advertisers. And in some cases, sportsbook sponsors will these special betting zones in the arena. Now, and in fact, and you may not know this, it's part of their deal with the betting agencies that these media companies do that. So, for example, TSN in 2022, they signed a multi-year deal with FanDuel, giving them official sportsbook partner status for TSN in Canada. Now, that deal involves collaboration on content. Okay, and in the broadcast, specifically integrating FanDuel's odds, betting odds, and their information into the sports broadcast. And this is the new model in all pro sports. And as you know, when you watch, say, football, the halftime is as much about betting odds as it is about the plays, right? It's a really big shift that's happening. It's quite recent. So, how much would TSN or Sportsnet get from these sports booking partners? Well, they won't say, okay? But we can bet it's quite a lot of money. Another really important growth area in this is betting apps like DraftKings, FanDuel, PointsBet. They offer daily fantasy sports, okay? Fantasy sports games as well. Now, if you're unsure what these are, you've never engaged in fantasy. Anyway, it's simulated games where you're the general manager. You create the roster. You can trade your players. It's a virtual team of real-world athletes, and the outcome is determined by the actual performance of those players in live games. Now, this is not a new concept. It's been around since at least the 1950s, first in golf, and then it gets big in the 80s with baseball. Of course, because most data-driven fans there are is baseball. And at that point, it was called the Rotisserie League Baseball. And it's a lot of sports journalists that were driving this. It's interesting stuff. But then it exploded with the rise of the internet. And in 1995, ESPN launched a fantasy baseball game online. Same year, Molson Beer launched a fantasy hockey website, 1995. Now, these fans, super important. What makes them unique is, well, by 2022, their numbers. They in the U.S. and Canada, so North America, there's over 60 million by 2022 fantasy sports players. Mainly football, but also under that baseball. Basketball second, baseball then hockey. Okay, but they're promoted by leagues not just because they're massive in number, but because these fantasy sport players are wealthier than your average sports viewer. They're often more educated, and not incidentally, 90% of them are white, and more often than not, they're not married. They're bachelors, which means they spend a lot of money on themselves. So they're this fantastic target demographic for advertisers who hit them with everything: the alcohol brands, airlines, right, cell phones, shoes, whatever, right? They have a lot of disposable income, and they're a very important target. So sports networks like ESPN, they have dedicated weekly fantasy sports programming to get at this really lucrative demographic. Individual NHL teams are also entering into deals with sportsbook apps and betting platforms for money. And the gambling companies are just everywhere. There's been this tsunami of advertising, and you can't not have noticed it, including brand ambassadors who plug the apps, like Connor McDavid and Gretzky for BetMGM, as you see in this image here. At the same time, and I find this hilarious, athletes are giving these responsible gaming messages. Responsible gaming, know your limit, play within it kind of nonsense. Now, this is because the Canadian Gaming Association stipulates that itself in its own code. And what the Canadian Gaming Association stipulates is that gambling must not be promoted as quote unquote risk-free, and also it must not target children, even though a lot of these gambling apps are designed like candy for the adult child. And anyway, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, but yeah, that code, it's not government, but you have to believe that it exists because they do not want to be regulated by government, right? They're trying to prevent the banning of advertising in sports betting, which has already happened in the UK, for example, right? And that's also what happened to other vices in the past in North America, like tobacco. Okay, so let's make sure we monitor ourselves so that we don't get regulated by the state. In any case, result it's a bit of hypocrisy there is what is not too hard to see. But the result of all this action, well, a few things, okay? A few things. So let's get to that. First, as I said, with online betting now being legal, with sport betting in general being legal, you have increased viewership. Okay? So that's a good. There's solid evidence that sports betting increases viewership of NHL games. And if a fan has placed a bet on a game, and he's likely or she's likely to stay engaged throughout the broadcast, even if they're not fans of one of the teams playing. So you get higher ratings, you get more ad revenue for the league. Also, another thing is that the data and the analytics are a lot better than ever, right? There is that. And that's because sports betting companies rely on player statistics, Steam stats, historical stats, in order to calculate the odds and their spread. Right. So, for example, the NHL has started using more advanced statistics in broadcast, and it launched NHL Stats. I think it was initially called NHL Stats and Information. It launched that in 2017, and at that point they digitized. That was the 100th anniversary of the NHL, and they digitized all 100 years of their statistics for their 100th anniversary. 15 million data points from 24,000 games, and the most important being the more recent ones. So yeah, we now have both historical and real-time analytics to support betting. Also, another thing, with more player data and performance, players can see this as a way to increase their profile, which is not hard to do, right? They can increase their popularity and their fan base, and that's really good for their marketability. Okay, but there are downsides to all of this. And so let's look at that briefly before we quit. Gaming, for one, it adds to the pressure on players. That's one downside in the turn we've taken. Adds to the pressure on players. And when you know people are losing confidence in you or respect, that's tough, right? As a professional athlete, when you're well paid to be delivering. And Ken Dryden talks about that in Game Change. He talks about how his big salary made him feel a lot more pressure, right, to deliver. Which is in itself kind of sad, but when you know people are losing money on you, that's next level, right? And it's a fact that increased harassment from fans is a thing and connected to the rise of online betting. Abuse heaped on athletes from losers, and completely intended double meaning there. Has been a thing since sport betting started, and is getting worse. 1 of 3 NHL players report that they've gotten more harassment since the legalization of online betting, or betting in sports in general. And that's true of goalies especially, who get blamed inordinately when things go sideways. There's also, with that, heightened concerns about the mental health of players, if not their physical concern. Now, the worst case of the latter, of course, is, and maybe your mind was already going there, is Andres Escobar, the Colombian soccer player who was murdered for his own goal screw-up in the 1994 FIFA World Cup. And that happened simply because his murderer has lost a lot of money. Now, that's obviously an extreme example, but it's one that makes the point of what gambling does. It's a very personal thing, and it can establish this very unhealthy relationship between fan and player. Also, that's the other thing. We're kind of back in the Victorian era now, where fans also don't trust what they're watching. A growing number of North Americans are losing trust in pro and college sports. And a survey that verified this was done by NBC in 2025, and it showed that a big majority of Americans, 70%, think that sports gambling, quote, lessens the integrity of the game. There's also clearly, as we have seen with Evander Kane and others, the risk of players getting involved in gambling themselves, and the increasing visibility of betting-related content is a huge risk for them. It's everywhere. You can't get away from it. And we have no idea if or how many players might be risking their careers to bet on their own leagues. Now, it's not untrackable. Because when there's unusual betting activity and big payouts, it raises flags. And in fact, leagues are now paying third-party firms like Sport Trader to monitor betting for unusual patterns that might show match fixing or inside knowledge or something unseemly. But of course, these algorithms aren't foolproof, and we have to wonder if they're kind of a greenwashing, making it look that they're taking it seriously again. An argument that the leagues use often is that players make so much money that they are disincentivized from taking risks, and they're big risks, right? Lifetime ban is nothing to take lightly, and now with the minimum salary in the NHL getting close to $1 million, and that's always American dollars, so add a 30% bonus on top of your other bonuses. That's a lot to gamble away, and for most players, it is too much to gamble away. And yeah, gaming is monitored. Off patterns can reveal themselves. So those are the dual arguments from a league like the NHL. Right, but it doesn't always work. And it certainly didn't stop the NBA's Jonte Porter. He played for the Toronto Raptors. He got banned from the NBA after he threw his already not great game. And then the NBA launched this investigation into Porter after sportsbooks noticed irregular betting on his statistics in two Raptors games where he quit after playing only a few minutes. So what the investigation showed is that Porter had placed at least 13 bets on NBA games using a friend's online betting account. So unusual activity on a player that shouldn't have unusual much activity on them was a trigger in that case, and he was found out. And more upsetting, as I've said, we've seen a lot more of the same in the NBA scandal with Chauncey Billups and the FBI sting more than 30 players in this massive, elaborate, illegal gaming operation, which incidentally had ties to 4 mafia families in New York. So with all this, you can totally see that the ghosts of Ty Cobb, of Shoeless Joe, the famous 1919 baseball scandal, they're really back and they're really haunting us today. We really are back in that era. We also know that more and more money is being wagered. Okay? And the Canadian Gaming Association estimates that $15 billion was spent by Canadians on gambling in 2020 when it was illegal. Okay, and we know that since legalization, it's increased every year. Okay? Ontario keeps very careful statistics on this, unlike other provinces. And in the opening year of legalization, its profits for all online gaming in Ontario 1.4 billion. Second year it was 2.4. Third year 3.2. Okay, and in that third year, which was 2024 to 5, Ontario gamblers spent an amazing $82.7 billion betting online. Now that's Ontario alone, and the statistics are predicted to go much higher, as you can see here in this graph, if things keep going the way that they are. And the final point I want to make, and it's connected to my last slide and what the point I was making there about players gambling, is it is not victimless. Okay? Gambling is not victimless. It is not innocuous. Okay? It's for many people, it's simply a harmless pastime, a way to keep it tabs with your team, and a way to really get more out of the game. You pay more attention when you have just even a little bit of money riding on it, even for fun, and it can be a great source of entertainment among friends, right? Obviously, but it's also super destructive for those with impulse control issues and those who are prone to develop an addiction. And this used to be about 1 to 2% of adults in North America. That's the severe disorder, right? The kind that destroys your life, where you lose your house, your partner, you start stealing from friends if you can, you lose your job. There's also problem gambling, where you just bleed yourself dry over decades because the house always wins, right? But problem gamblers, they're not stealing to support it. They're not borrowing and losing the house, the wife, and the job, right? But they're big too, and that's a group that's estimated to be another 2 to 3% of North Americans, so not insignificant. Studies contradict each other in this, so we really don't know the real numbers, but we know it's not good and that it's growing. And here's another thing that's new: is it's impossible for addicts to stay away from it now because it's in your face wherever you turn. Okay, and you see that. Read up on Aaron Ward's life, and a great headline for the article by Rick Tocchet about him. Gambling ruined his life. This Stanley Cup champion and Carolina Hurricanes player. And now it's everywhere around him as he tries to rebuild, and that's super tough. And I used to be a pack-a-day smoker, and I know that when you saw less people smoking, when smoking ads were pulled, it's much less tempting. It's much easier to quit when it's not in your face all the time. And 100% it's designed to get at these problem gamblers, the advertising we see now. Okay, so I'll end with a Reddit post that you may agree with, and here it is. Quote, embracing gambling was a very short-sighted cash grab that will not end well, but billionaire owners really needed that extra nickel up front instead of a healthy league making modest monetary returns in perpetuity. Okay, end quote. Okay, and I'll end with this. We know that gambling profits corrupt sports. The Victorians knew this. That's why they banned it. But now pro sports really wants to eat their cake and to have it too. Well, is this going to change as we see more scandals, as more people distrust what they're watching? I don't really think so. Right, and people forget too, and also scandals generate excitement. The NBA, there's always this talk, oh, this will be so destructive for the league, NBA, NHL, whatever it is, right? Whatever scandal, and long run, it isn't. People forget, and it generates interest, unfortunately, and. Yeah, people betting on Ned Hanlan, they knew there was fixing going on, right? They knew that bolts were being cut. They knew that the crazy antics suggested gambling and throwing races, but that only made him more popular. And I'll finish with this. I teach a course on the American West, and it's back in the days of the Old West, the most popular betting game in saloons was not poker. Okay, it was a game called Faro. In fact, there's a town in Yukon called Faro, Yukon. And the house always won in Faro. And the reason the house always wins, well, they always win anyway, but it was a very well-known one. And it's because they had this mechanical card shuffler in Faro, and the mechanism on that could be fixed, could be set to favor the house. Now, so everyone knew that, and they still played Faro. Right? So we are willing victims. Anyway, will any of this matter? The scandals, the whatnot? I simply wouldn't bet on it. Okay, so there you go. There's our gambling lecture from Victorian era to today. I hope you got something out of it, and thanks for listening. Any questions? Definitely let me know.